Welcome to Underwater CSI International Revealed with your hosts, Senior Investigators Rich Morin and Ed Myron.
Welcome to Underwater CSI International Revealed. I'm your host, Senior Investigator Rich Morin, and with me, as always, is our co-host,
Senior Investigator Ed Myron.
Ed, what's going on today, buddy?
Well, it's going to be another good show, Rich. I think it's always fun doing these things together. So I'm looking forward to this show and hope the audience is too as well.
Excellent. Today's show is going to be, we'll call it the last dive. It's a sad ending on this particular one. It's going to involve two advanced divers, one newly certified. I think he had one deep dive under his belt, maybe to 100 feet during his training. But this particular one, two divers go down, one comes back, always a sad thing.
Yeah, that's a tragedy.
All right. On this particular dive, just to kind of give you a little bit info on it, these divers were going to self-train themselves to become technical divers because they read a book. And in the book, there was technical diving involved, and they thought that was pretty cool. And rather than go through the proper training, getting professional training and proper equipment and stuff, they're going to self-train themselves with an aluminum 80 cubic foot tank and 13 cubic foot pony bottles. So if you're familiar with pony bottles, 13 cubic feet, not a lot of air, and they're very small bottles. They're very short. So they decide that they select an area on a body of water that they have to get to by boat. Neither one of them have a power boat, so they both invest in dive kayaks. This was back in it was probably mid-90s, and this particular, when the kayaks were just coming out, and there was a company that was making kayaks specifically for diving. They had areas for your tanks with your BC and a little area for your weight belt, and even a little hole to put your dive flag in. So they decide that they're going to launch these kayaks and head across to a dive site that they know are deep, but it's pretty secluded. There's no cell phone service, and back then, not too many people had cell phones because they were the bigger bag phones back then and quite expensive.
And it's quite a distance from where they launched the boat to their actual destination for their dive.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you should do prior to any dive is make sure that you have emergency protocol in place.
Right.
What happens? What if? Always think about the what ifs. What if something happens? How are we going to get this person into medical care?
Right.
So they had no plan whatsoever. The survivor was in his 30s and stated that they had over 600 dives. Looking at the length of time that they were certified and also realizing that they worked full-time, or that he worked full-time, and doing the math, there was no way that this person could have 600 dives under their belt. Upon further investigation, finding out that how long they'd been certified, whether or not the equipment that they were currently using was the same equipment that they had at certification time, and reviewing the information on their dive computers, or his dive computers, had 62 dives.
Right.
That's all we found. The deceased, the survivor, claimed that the deceased had approximately 200 dives, and all we found on the dive computer was 28, and one dive to 100 feet.
Right.
Prior to the accident.
So technical diving, in relationship to just a recreational diver, their certification was to 100 feet.
Not for technical,
no,
but
for
recreational.
advanced. Yeah, right, yeah, for their advanced class.
Their advanced training, they're certified to 100. Now, a lot of people go, no, it's 130. Recreational diving for young divers now, right, for 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, their max depth as an open water diver is 40 feet. Open water divers, otherwise are going to be certified to 60 feet, 12 and above.
Right.
Advanced divers, for the junior divers, they're certified to 70 feet for advanced. And one of the reasons that they're certified to 70 is because narcosis can happen at a depth as shallow as 80 feet. All right. And the effects would increase with depth. So other advanced divers get certified to a max depth of 100. Right. The effects with narcosis normally happen at about 100, and they continue to increase with depth if someone's going to get it. So they're certified to 100 feet, and there's other reasons behind that why they're certified to 100 feet. It has to do with the physics, physiology, et cetera.
Right.
And then with deep diver specialty training as a recreational diver certified to a max depth of 130.
Right.
Now, technical divers, you have to have a little bit of experience under your belt first to enroll in a technical diving program. But they're going down with additional equipment, a lot of extra training, a lot more education, a lot more knowledge as far as the physics and physiology, mixed gases, et cetera.
Right.
So a lot more involved, and it takes a lot of specialized training and the proper training, making sure that you got the proper professional that's teaching you. Always feel good with the instructor that you're with, regardless of the agency that you're going with.
Right.
Now,
so and not to interrupt you. So now these guys read a book on technical diving.
Well, it wasn't a book
Oh.
specifically for tech diving. It was a book involving tech divers.
Okay.
And they were just, excited about it. Eyes kind of lit up a little bit. Hey, that's what we're going to do. And we're going to self-train ourselves to do that because it's too expensive for us to invest in the proper equipment for tech diving.
Okay.
So we're going to do it in an aluminum 80 cubic foot tank with a 13 cubic foot pony bottle and nothing but recreational equipment.
Right.
Except for some of the modifications that they did, actually a modification that they did because they thought it was pretty cool in the book.
Right. Okay. So now we go back to the book. They read all this stuff. They said, "Oh, we're going to do this," and their dive plan was to go to
a touch and go dive, which
Okay.
means that they're going to follow the contour down till they hit 150.
Okay.
At 150, they're going to turn around and they're going to come back up. Now, they didn't plan any stage deco stops. They didn't plan any deep stops, which basically should have been, half their maximum depth for their first stop. All they planned on doing was coming back to their safety stop at 15 feet and doing a 3-minute safety stop.
So this goes back to what you talked about before, the proper training, going through all the proper techniques regarding any type of diving.
Yeah, and under supervision.
Right.
Making sure that you've got professional staff members that are there.
Right.
That's key.
Right.
Proper training is everything.
Right.
You can never get enough education as far as it. We've been diving a long time, Ed. I mean,
Right.
we're going on 40 years. You've been diving actually longer than I have. Even though I've got a lot of certification, a lot of education, we've authored a lot of programs over the years. I think we have 28 courses that we've authored as far as specialties goes. And
Right.
in recreational diving, we have like 60 plus programs in underwater crime scene investigation. I still feel like I'm scratching the surface.
Sure.
There's just so much to learn
Right.
about the underwater environment, whether it be the aquatic life or whether it be about, diving itself or, the mixed gases and the different pressures. And I mean, just everything involved. There's always something to learn.
Yep.
I mean, we're learning constantly. That's why we keep developing more programs as we continue to grow.
Right.
You got to keep up.
Right. Yeah. Sorry to get you off track there a little bit.
No problem.
So their dive plan was touch and go dive, and then what happened from there?
Well, so they go ahead and they arrive at the dive site. They're going to launch from a state park. They load up their kayaks and off they go. No emergency plan at all.
Right.
Right. They have no way to contact anybody in the event of an emergency. There's no radio. Again, cell phones were pretty much non-existent back then.
Right.
So they paddle over to this area, which is a big rock formation that came out into this particular body of water. They went around the corner, which was a very secluded area. I mean, there's no houses on that side, et cetera. And they went ahead and brought their kayaks up toward the shoreline to tie them off, set up all their equipment, and then getting ready to do the dive. Now, one of the things that they did was, actually, I won't give that away yet because that'll be in our conclusion. But before we get into this, if you want to grab some paper and pen or pencil to write with, take some notes, we're not going to tell you what our conclusion is until the very end. So
Right.
kind of give you give you a chance to follow along, see if you can figure out what happened.
Right. Right.
Because again, we got some pretty interesting things that an investigator, properly trained investigator, would pick up on and raise
Right.
some flags.
Look at right.
Yeah. So let's talk about the equipment first. We've already mentioned the tanks. They got aluminum 80 cubic foot tanks and 13 cubic foot pony bottles. Both supposedly filled to 3,000 psi's, right around that area. The pony bottles were a relatively new investment for them because that was what they considered their technical gear.
Right.
Okay.
And it's probably something likely that they could afford at the time as well.
Yeah, and I think that was part of it too, was budget concerns. They both had computers and they both had backup computers, and they happened to be the same brand. We've talked about that before.
Right.
I spent 25 years on a review committee, a volunteer review committee, and we would review accidents and fatalities that occurred in the recreational dive industry,
Right.
and make recommendations to training organizations that were under the Recreational Scuba Training Council. We would go ahead and make recommendations for standard changes, procedures changes, things like that, if that needed to be improved on. But
Right.
most of the stuff that we found was diver error. People diving outside their limitations, getting into areas that are way beyond what they're trained for, et cetera, whether it be conditions, visibility, current situations, or depths.
Right.
All right.
So it sounds like from just the initial part of this, their training or lack of, and what their dive plan is, sounds like that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and I hate to use this phrase, but it was kind of an accident waiting to happen.
Right.
Yep. So anyway, they get geared up and they begin their descent. And as they're going along the contour, heading down to 150 in this particular body of water right there, it went down to roughly 200 feet. I think it was like 203 or something like that. But they're going to hit at 150, turn around and come back up the contour. So they're heading down the contour, and the survivor, after interviewing the survivor, claimed that at 150 that the younger diver, the advanced diver, the eventually deceased diver, had severe narcosis.
So narcosis. So you explained a little bit about that, but go ahead and explain what
nitrogen narcosis is a euphoric state underwater. It affects people differently. Sometimes, you get affected with it. Sometimes you don't. There's a lot of contributing factors that will play a role in the onset of nitrogen narcosis. But what usually happens is people aren't thinking rationally at this point. Everybody handles it a little bit different. Some people refer to it as a drunkenness stage underwater, and there's varying degrees of drunkenness stage.
Right.
So people handle it a little bit different. So the survivor claimed that the victim was experiencing severe narcosis and just wasn't, his faculties weren't there. So again, we're talking about early 90s now, and integrated BCs for weight systems were brand new coming out on the market. And some of the first BCs out there, when they had the weight integration pockets that you could deploy, they were made out of fabric only. And they had a big flap that came out of the front, and they folded over and Velcroed back down to the outside of the BCD.
Right.
But because the fabric had no stiffener on the inside, if they were using a soft weight or putting, bullet weights in there, in a horizontal face down position, these pockets had a tendency to roll right out of the BC pocket itself, out of the holder for the pocket,
right,
rolled right out and just kind of hung below you, only held on by the outside Velcro. But on the Scuba Review Committee, we were reviewing a lot of runaway ascents, because what would happen is these pockets sometimes would roll out, and as the person turned, what would happen is the weight now would kind of shift a little bit and unpeel the Velcro on the outside, tear away, and then the pocket would drop.
Right.
And now they don't have adequate weight to stay down, and they'd end up in a runaway ascent. So we were reviewing a lot of issues with people getting hurt, decompression sickness, lung expansion injuries, et cetera, from these weight pouches. So what the industry did, through recommendations was, they needed to find a way to secure these pockets in better. So unfortunately, the first step was, all right, let's add Velcro to the inside now of the BCD, where the weight pocket would slide in, and put another piece on the pocket itself toward the end of the pocket that's going to slide the deepest part in, and then press it together. The problem is when it's loaded with weight and you're trying to slide it in, as soon as those two pieces of Velcro, one on the pocket, one on the BC, as soon as they would touch, it kind of stopped at that point.
Stop.
So there's only a few fibers that were holding it in.
Right.
So they were still having a tendency to come out. So then what happened was, they started coming up with, and people were coming up with this on their own. They started getting, little plastic, they'd make little plastic pieces to put in there first to cover the Velcro on the BCD on the inside of the pocket, slide the pocket in, right? Once it was in place, pull the plastic out, and now it's lined up Velcro to Velcro, and they could press it down.
Right.
All right. Here's the issue, though. Velcro is not designed to slide against itself.
Right.
All
It's
right.
meant to peel away, right?
It's designed to peel away. Try pulling Velcro apart by sliding it, one direction and the other instead of peeling it apart.
Right.
It's difficult to do.
Right.
And so now what was happening was you couldn't get these pockets out in an emergency situation.
Right.
Right. They just weren't pulling up because they're Velcroed down too securely.
Right.
Right. So then what they decided to do is, all right, somebody came up with the idea, hey, listen, rather than use that plastic sleeve to slide the pocket in, let's mount it inside the pocket to make the pocket rigid.
Right.
Right. And get rid of that Velcro inside altogether. And eventually, over time, they got rid of the Velcro on the outside also.
And that's the way the newer BCs that have integrated weights are set up currently.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So the survivor, his plan was then what? Once he noticed that his buddy was in this euphoric state or was not thinking rationally, what was his plan at depth?
Well, again, through the interview process,
Right.
Okay, he claimed that they were at 150.
Correct.
And he's going to send his buddy to the surface
By removing his weight pouches.
from 150.
Okay.
Okay. So he claims that he went ahead and secured the weight pouches, grabbed the handles, all right, peeled back the outside Velcro that goes to the outside of the BCD that folds back,
Right.
right, but could not get the pockets out because of the Velcro being held inside. Remember, this is early stages now.
Right.
Okay. Could not get the pockets out and struggled with it. Okay. But now, high anxiety, he's losing air, can't get the, or not losing air, but breathing air quickly, can't get the guy under control. He decides that I better go to the surface and try to get help.
Right.
So he claims that at that point he aborted the dive and started to head up. He ended up with mild decompression sickness and refused treatment.
Okay.
Right. Even though whoever was on scene initially was trying to get him to go to a recompression chamber. So he went ahead and, claimed that, hey, I was trying to save him, but I just could not get those damn pockets out of there.
Yeah.
So we went ahead and we got called to recover the victim. We go out as we descend. We're seeing marks along the bottom all the way down. So very poor buoyancy control, kind of like where knees are dragging, so
Right.
it looked like they were possibly, bending the knees a lot for a kick cycle.
And we could see that pretty much all the way down. And it was both divers.
Absolutely.
Right.
Now, the other thing is the survivor wasn't allowing us to look at his equipment prior to this. Okay.
Right.
We were trying to get him to show up at scene. We wanted him to bring his equipment along. We wanted to inspect it, et cetera. Refused. All right. Wasn't on site, et cetera, when we went to try to recover his buddy, his dive buddy there. So we get down there and we're seeing, like I said, we're seeing fin marks all the way down. And we get down to 132 feet and we find the victim.
Right.
Well, that raises a flag right there because he's claiming that the victim had severe narcosis at 150, probably not thinking rationally enough at that point to start an ascend back up the contour,
Right.
right, to abort the dive, right? If he had severe narcosis, once again, the rationale isn't there. So it was kind of raised the flag. Well, he's at 132. Well, we continued on to 150.
Right.
Just to see are the marks continuing.
Right.
Well, from approximately 130 feet, because we could see the victim up ahead of us, so we were kind of more fixated on the victim at that point,
Right.
and we kind of lost our focus on the marks on the bottom at that point. So there was probably a 15-foot section because visibility was pretty good down there that we were not focusing anymore. Once we found the victim. Again, we wanted to avoid any contact yet or avoid getting too close. We just wanted to see first how far, depth-wise they went.
Right.
So we went around the victim. We continued on. Now we're only seeing one mark.
Right.
in the bottom. We're not seeing double fin marks. So either somebody got really good buoyancy control all of a sudden,
Right.
on a deep dive. And you can imagine they're certified to 100 feet. The deceased only had one dive under his belt to 100 feet, according to his computer,
Right.
or his computers. And, so you can imagine once they got past 100, they're probably fixated on their console now, looking at their gauges going, oh, crap, oh, crap, oh, crap,
Right.
and seeing how much air they're using at that point.
Right. And they're also thinking this is going to be a touch and go dive. So we have to watch our computers because once we hit 150, we have to stop, turn around, and go back.
That's right. So anyway, we follow it down to 150 feet, and we can see disturbance on the bottom,
right,
where somebody had made contact, was kneeling into deep silt,
right,
it appeared to be kind of a circular motion. So to us, it tells us that they're spinning around to start their way back up the contour.
Right.
All right. So we come back up the contour. So somebody made it to 150, but we're only finding one mark on the bottom. So either somebody had very good buoyancy control and somebody didn't, or somebody wasn't there.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
So we follow back up to 132 where the victim is. Now, as an investigator, right, there's lots of things that we have to look for. Once again, we start big and we go on. So we're looking at the area surrounding where we find the victim. The other thing is silt in this particular body of water, extremely thick on the bottom.
Right.
I mean, if you were horizontal and you tried to reach down to touch the bottom, it's deeper than your shoulder. You can't reach down with your fingertips.
Right.
Right. So we have more than 3 feet of silt on the bottom.
So we know that area. We know what it's going to be like. And the body is where?
Well, first of all, we got very extreme cold conditions because
right,
we passed through 2 thermoclines on the way down.
Right.
They're diving wetsuits. Okay. You and I are in dry suits.
Correct.
But we're in, they're in wetsuits, and again, single 80s and stuff. We're in our tech gear, but we find the victim, and basically they're in a bowl, all right, of silt.
Right.
Kind of a bowl. It's like carved out. It's just piled up along the outside edges of silt, and the bottom of the bowl doesn't quite go down to solid bottom.
Right.
Right. But the victim's laying kind of in a fetal position on the right side.
And again, on the right side in this case.
Well, we don't know that yet.
Right.
All right. So they're just on their right side.
Okay.
All right. Don't give too much away yet. Okay. Now, the body is heavily laden with silt. So in other words, it's telling us that something big happened right here.
Right.
Where the silt just billowed up. Okay. And from looking at the bowl, that tells us a lot right there.
Right.
I don't know if any of our listeners out there can start to figure out what's going on, but they're laying in a bowl that's hollowed out, all right, with a big wall of silt all the way around them. All right. So now laying on their right side in a fetal position, the hood is pulled back, all right, their wetsuit hood.
Right.
But the mask is still on. Okay. The mask is flooded, completely flooded, but it's still on their face.
Still in place. Right.
So who would take a mask off, pull their hood back, and put a mask back on?
Right.
Right. I'm not sure I know to anybody who's going to do that in those cold conditions. Okay. I mean, just ice cold down there. So that's telling us something also. And we have to remember from the beginning of this reveal what we talked about.
Right.
Okay. As far as them self-training themselves to be
Technical
divers in a book
right,
that they read.
Right.
Okay. So it raises a flag, but it also answers a question.
Sure.
Right. So we continue to look. And as we, check gauges, we can see that both computers, okay, max depths were 150.
Right.
This is the guy that went to 150.
Right.
Okay. So we know he was down there.
Right. He's the least trained.
Right.
Just one dive under his belt to 100 feet.
Yep.
And now he's going to 150.
150.
So the next thing we noticed was the regulators. Go ahead.
Yeah, the primary regulator was out of the mouth.
Right.
The standard alternate air source that they had was still secured to the BCD, but the pony bottle regulator had been deployed.
Okay.
And was laying next to the victim.
So there are some clues right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Also, the buoyancy control device itself was still secured to the victim. None of the clips were undone.
So D-rings, everything was in place.
Absolutely, and
Belly,
adjusted. Yeah.
right, belly strap and everything
Yep.
were in place. Nothing
Yeah,
appeared
Velcro,
to be
cummerbund, everything. Yeah.
okay.
And then the weight pouches were still in and Velcroed down on the outside.
Okay, so some other clues right there.
Yeah, absolutely. If people have been listening, yeah, there's some clues we're giving away.
Right.
Right. And then working our way down.
So in relationship to the bowl effect, working our way down. Go ahead.
Right. The victim had one fin on.
One fin.
The fin that they had on, the strap was off the heel.
Okay.
Okay. So that tells us something very important right there.
Okay.
Okay. So one fin is off, gone. All right. And the other fin, the strap is off. We did find the other fin afterwards below the victim in what was left of the silt on the bottom.
Okay.
So once we went to extract the victim and we dug down on the silt looking for the other fin, we did find it.
Right.
Right. And the fin strap was not broken.
So
Okay. And the fin strap was adjusted properly, the same as the other one. But on the other one, the strap was off the heel.
So the conclusion would be
Not yet.
no, not yet.
Don't give it away, buddy.
But the conclusion would be with all that silt, there's something that happened right at this location.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because one, it was confined to that big bowl. Two, the victim was heavily laden with silt at that point.
Right.
Three, we found the fin underneath the victim. Right. So whatever happened right there.
Right.
Yep.
So what's next?
All right. Well, next, what we were finally able to do, we were finally able to secure the survivor's computers.
Right.
Okay. And remember at the beginning, claimed that at 150, he's trying to help a dive buddy who's got severe narcosis by sending him to the surface, trying to jettison his weight system.
Right.
Okay. Undoing the Velcro on the outside and pulling hard, but because of the Velcro on the inside, can't get the pockets out.
Right.
So ends up abandoning to go get help. Okay. The survivors' computers, both of them, registered a max depth 128.
And we know through the investigation that the victim made it to 150.
Yes. From the marks in the silt,
right,
from the turnaround point,
right,
to the computers, both at 150.
Right. So he turned around at 150.
Yeah.
So we know now.
Well, are we going to go through the conclusion now?
Well, I think at this point, we're there, right? I mean,
right.
we know that the victim was at 150.
All right. And again, there's so many other little clues that we came across.
Right.
But in the interest of time, et cetera, and some of the stuff matters. I should say everything that mattered we brought into the reveal.
Right.
All right. So basically, what happened? You've got two divers attempting to self-train themselves to become tech divers on recreational dive gear. The only thing different is no snorkels, right? And the fact that they are using pony bottles. And
right.
Pony bottles are recommended if you're going to be doing deep dives anyway, actually beyond 60 feet.
Right.
They're highly recommended. Not required, but highly recommended.
And one of the things that I think I may have failed to bring up was the age of the regulators on the one pony bottle.
Yeah. The deceased regulator was purchased we found out later, at a garage sale. It was a 1972. I won't say the brand.
Right.
All right. But it was a 1972 regulator. Hadn't been serviced. Okay. Probably mounted it to the pony bottle and pushed the purge button in, took a couple of breaths and said, hey, that's good.
Yeah, this works.
Okay. The regulator did not fail. Let me just say that. It did
right.
not fail. When we tested it, it did work.
Absolutely.
Okay. But in the early 70s, the way some of the apparatus was connected at that time, some of the hoses were, it was like, hey, if we don't need that length of hose, let's get rid of it.
Right.
So some of the hoses were extremely short. Okay. This particular regulator, man, it had a short hose on it. We measured it. It was only 17 inches long.
Yeah. So 17 inches.
Yeah.
Compared to where he has this mounted.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that.
Right. That's going to come up in our conclusion.
Yeah. Actually, we'll start talking about that now.
So let me just go back to the reg just for 1 minute. So We have a reg that was purchased from a garage sale
Garage sale.
in the 70s.
No, it was purchased at a garage sale
No,
recently.
Well, I'm sorry, it
Yeah.
was manufactured in the 70s.
Yeah, correct.
The accident happened in the early 90s.
Yeah.
So there's a long duration there where that regulator
And you don't know how long it'd been since it'd been used or serviced.
Right.
I have no idea.
And again, we're going back to a technical dive to 150.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. So now you've got the two people. They're going to be self-training themselves because of information that they got from reading a book.
Right.
Okay. They take their snorkels off and they go ahead and, hey, we get a pony bottle. We're tech divers.
Right.
And off they go. And it's so unfortunate. So they head on down, and so what happens is they're going down probably side by side, right?
Right.
And as they're going down, once they pass 100 feet, that's when they're like, oh man, we've never been this deep before. Now we're going to 150.
Right.
So you can imagine the anxiety level is
Right.
increasing, their breathing rate is increasing, they're burning through air quick. Okay. At 128, the more experienced diver, all right, is looking at probably his pressure gauge at that point and realizes, I don't have enough air to complete this dive going to 150.
Right.
And I'm not sure I got enough air to complete the dive to begin with. All right. So at that point, the other diver is continuing on by himself now to 150, not realizing that his buddy stopped.
Right. Because
Right.
he's so focused on his depth gauge.
All he wants to do is get
to
that over
150.
with right now. Right?
Right.
There's no supervision. There's no instructor with them that's going to take care of him in the event that, there's an issue underwater or to make him feel all warm and fuzzy.
Right.
All of that's out of the picture.
Right.
So he is so focused on his depth gauge.
He doesn't even
realize that his buddy
Right.
is bailed.
Right.
Right. Is on his way back up the contour.
Right.
He gets to 150, turns around, nobody there.
Right.
Okay.
He's all alone.
All alone at 150 feet.
Right.
Now he's starting to look at his gauge, notices that his pressure gauge is getting down there, starts back up the contour,
Right.
gets up to 132. What do they learn as recreational divers? Hey, especially cold conditions, don't bring your tank back with anything less than
500
PSIs. All right. So here he gets down to 500 PSIs, decides to, right? So this is telling us that he's coherent,
Right. Right.
He's probably not suffering from narcosis, especially severe narcosis. Maybe he's a little lightheaded, but he managed to deploy his pony bottle reg. Unfortunately, the pony bottle is a 13 cubic foot pony bottle. It's not a lot of air.
Right.
Okay. The way he had it mounted at the very base of his tank. Hey, because it's easy for me to reach back and open or close the valve.
Right.
So it's really low on his tank. After we tested it in that position, the length of the hose or the regulator would not reach the victim's mouth.
So he had air in his pony bottle.
Now, there wasn't any gauge on the pony bottle.
Right.
Once we tested it on the surface and we put a regulator with a gauge on it, or actually we used a tank gauge on it, it was at just below 3,000 PSIs.
Okay. So
the tank is full.
So the tank is full in his pony. He has 500 PSI
In his
remaining
primary tank.
in his primary tank.
Yeah.
And
the reg won't reach his mouth.
the reg won't reach his mouth.
All right. So he's just a few inches shy of getting it into his mouth. So you can imagine I'm at 132 feet now, probably thinking he's still at 150.
Right.
Right. And I don't have any air.
Right.
So what happens when people panic? Ed, we've 25 years on a review committee. You and I have been doing the Underwater CSI 37 years now.
Yep.
What do we notice when people panic? What's the first thing that they do? People think that they try to book to the surface. Nah, that's not the first
Right.
thing.
So the first thing, they're going to spit out the reg.
You spit the reg out.
Right.
Right. What's happening is when you interview survivors that have been in a high panic situation,
Right.
right? What's happening is if I can get myself out of this situation, out of this environment, I'm going to be okay. What's causing the problem is all this foreign equipment that I have on. No, that's what's keeping you alive, right? You just need to keep your faculties about you. But when people panic, they're not thinking rationally at this
Right,
point.
right.
So they spit the reg out. Okay. I know it sounds crazy, but listen, after dozens and dozens and dozens. I can't tell you how many.
Right.
On the review committee, how many we went over, and how many people we've interviewed, and how many deceased victims, with regulators out of their mouths, et cetera. But they spit the reg out.
Right.
The second thing they do is they try to reject some of their equipment, usually the mask being first. Now,
Right.
a lot of times people ask, oh, don't put your mask up on your forehead, okay, because it can be recognized as a distressed diver, et cetera. And there's all kinds of talk about it in the industry, and we're not here to say one way or another,
Right.
okay?
Right.
What we want to tell you is from our experience, when people reject their mask, in many situations, it doesn't come all the way off. It ends up on their forehead.
Right.
So to us as investigators, that kind of makes us a little nervous when we see people on the surface with masks on their forehead,
Sure.
right? Because we know that underwater, the second thing they're going to do is start rejecting some of their equipment.
Right.
The third thing they do, which most people think is the first, is then they try to book to the surface.
Right.
And again, they're not thinking rationally.
Right.
All right. They're not resorting back to their training.
Right.
Okay.
They're not thinking about getting hurt, going to the surface. They just want to get there.
Out of here.
Right.
All right. And so what happens is people, it's like climbing a ladder. Imagine a vertical ladder.
Right.
Okay. You reach up with one hand to grab an upper run, and you raise one leg to step up on the next run.
Yep.
Then you switch hands and legs. Okay. And you try to climb the ladder. Well, this is what's happening to people that are in this highly panicked situation.
Right.
It's like they're trying to climb that ladder, but what's happening is they're no longer kicking properly. The fin tips aren't pointing down. Their legs aren't locked out. They don't have a nice wide flutter kick going on. They're bringing their knees almost up to their chest, and those fin tips are just going straight up and down.
Right.
Okay?
It's just pulling them down.
Yeah. So now anyone who's been in a wetsuit and had neoprene boots on has probably experienced this at one point. You come back from the dive, all right, and my foot seems to be in a little further than it was before.
Right.
Or during a dive, if you have the type of straps where you got to pull the little ears in order to tighten up instead of the self-adjusting like spring straps or
Right.
bungee straps. All right, and you're like, they're getting loose on me. Well, what happens is as you're going along on a dive, if you think about your body position horizontal, if you're doing a flutter kick or any kind of kick cycle properly, the fin is always being pushed forward
Right.
to the direction of your foot. So it's actually being pushed, your foot's being a little bit deeper inside that foot pocket, which causes the fin strap to fall off, along with the compression of the neoprene
Right.
if you have thicker boots, right, from the compression at depth.
At depth, sure.
So you're losing a little bit of tightness on your straps there too.
Sure.
So then all of a sudden you notice that the fin strap came off, and more than likely that's the reason.
Right.
Right. Probably, hey, you got a good kick cycle at that point. Right.
Exactly.
So when people bicycle kick, though, and that's what's happening here, the fins are going straight up and down. They're driving that toe deep into that foot pocket.
Right.
The strap comes off.
Right.
After just a few more kick cycles like that, they pull their foot right out of their fin pocket.
Right.
And
Now they're in big trouble.
Yeah, and that's where we found that fin underneath the victim down in the silt.
Right.
Also, when they start bicycle kicking like that and reaching for the surface, it's not propelling them upwards,
Right.
because they're not using their fins effectively.
Right.
Actually, from the motion of their leg thrusting downward, it's actually pulling them down in the water.
Right.
All right. So there's the stomping on the bottom, right? Back and forth, one leg then the other, creating the silt, or
Right.
allowing
That
the silt
bowl.
to be pushed out,
Right.
creating that bowl situation.
Right.
All right. So that's how that occurs. Okay. So when the victim panicked, okay, spit the reg out, next thing they did is tried to take the mask off. In the book that they read, hey, guess what? Overhead environment divers, very common. You
Right.
put your mask on first. Then you pull your hood up. Okay. And the reason you do that is because if you make contact with the ceiling or something above you, it won't dislodge your mask strap.
Right.
So you got less chance of dislodging your mask strap or moving your mask around,
Right.
by putting the hood up over
Up
the
over
strap
the top.
itself. So, hey, I read that. That sounds cool. All right. That's what they did. Put the mask on first, then pulled the hood up.
Right.
So now what happens? Spits the reg out, tries to take the mask off, pulls it out, floods the mask, can't get it off, reaches up, pulls the hood back. All the time, legs are going up and down, up and
Right.
down.
Trying to get
Okay.
out.
By now, unfortunately, the victim's drowning.
Right.
Right. So never finishes going up to remove the mask.
Right.
So when we see the victim without the hood and still the mask on, that kind of told us right away that, okay, well, we understand, we realize that trying to self-train themselves to be tech divers from the survivors interview.
Right.
And that's one of the things that, they read in the book.
Right.
So the reason we found them on their right side was because the pony bottle, which is still full, is negatively buoyant, even just by a little bit, because it's a small pony bottle. It's a 13 cubic foot, 3,000 PSI aluminum.
Right.
Right. So it rolls them off to the right side. In a fetal position, all right, laying down. Now that can be from a few things, all right? But what I believe it's from is from the fact that the bowl, as they went down, the legs kind of came in as
Right.
the bowl got
Caused
narrower
them
as the bottom there.
Right.
Yep. So, hopefully there's a few people out there that kind of put it together. Again, it's just a sad situation all the way around.
Right.
Yeah.
And the survivor,
well, was back in the water 2 weeks later.
after presumably his dive buddy.
Yeah. Not presumably did. Passed
No,
away.
I mean,
He bailed on him.
presumably it was his dive buddy that he dove with in the past.
Yeah. And he was slightly bent.
Yeah.
Had decompression sickness.
And now is back in the water after 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks later, back in the water.
Yeah. It's a sad state of events.
Yeah,
right there.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And it all comes down to, proper training, education, knowledge, proper equipment.
Right.
It's the proper equipment. All the stuff we just talked about, it makes all the difference in the world. In this case here, somebody loses their life.
Right. Yep.
Unfortunately, Ed, we have a lot more of these stories in the future.
Yeah. And some of them are pretty well, I don't want to say gruesome, but they get pretty
involved, definitely
involved and are quite sad.
Yeah.
Yep.
In this case here, there's a lot of investigative work that goes into this.
Right.
We don't just go down and go, hey, the other thing is the recovery of the victim. When we're done with our initial investigation, and it comes time to recovering the victim, we don't know what happened prior to the dive.
Right.
We don't, once again, was there an argument? Was there a fight? Was there a disagreement? Does one person owe the other person money they don't want to pay him back, or are they having an affair with the other person's, significant other? We don't have any idea.
Right.
So we have to look into all of this and see whether or not this was foul play.
Right.
So we got to be very careful. So prior to bringing the victim up, okay, what we do is we'll actually bag the person underwater, put them in a body bag that's designed for in-water use. It has small mesh venting on it, so it still hopefully traps and holds any potential evidence that might be dislodged, during the egress. But we put bags over the feet, we put bags over the hands, and we put a bag over the head.
Right.
All right. These bags are all secured. Then we will go ahead and we'll put the victim inside of a specially designed body bag.
Right.
Now, the reason we do that, people ask and say, well, we put them over the feet because sometimes something that might be trapped in the soles of the shoe might lead us to another area of the investigation.
Right.
Okay, so there could be potential evidence. Could be hair, could be soil, could be lots of things. Okay. Right. So we want to protect that evidence and make sure it doesn't get washed out during an egress.
Same thing with the hands, right?
Yeah, same thing with the hands, underneath the fingernail beds.
Right.
Okay. Did they scratch somebody?
Right.
And there could be tissue that's underneath the fingernail beds. Could there be blood samples, et cetera?
Right.
Is there any way that we could get possible DNA
right.
evidence off of this? So we want to protect the hands.
Other markings on the hands.
Absolutely. Other markings, where they're in a scuffle.
Right.
Right. There are marks on it. We also look for, hey, did they have jewelry on?
Right.
Do we see areas on their wrist where they had a watch on or a ring on, et cetera?
Right.
From tan lines or from marks in the skin and stuff, and it's no longer there.
Right.
So all these things, it just goes on and on and on.
Sure.
And then we put a bag over the head, again, to protect any potential evidence on the scalp, but also the teeth. Did they bite somebody?
Right.
All right. Do we have possible DNA or possible evidence, skin fragment, et cetera, in the teeth itself?
Right.
Yep. I know later on in one of the episodes, we're going to talk about, we're off the coast of South America, and we come across a 10-year-old crime scene.
Yep.
And, from our initial investigation, DNA evidence and stuff. We basically solved a 10-year-old mystery.
Right.
But that'll be another story for another time.
Okay.
Well, anyway, Ed, another good show. If you liked it, please like and share it with your friends, tell your family, tell other divers especially, but get it out there, because what our goal is initially is to start getting enough advertisers where we can go ahead and start traveling and reenacting a lot of these cases, so you can see everything that's involved and also meet the rest of our staff.
Right.
We got a big crew, big team out there, and everybody's specialist in some point or another. So it gives you an opportunity to meet a lot of our staff members.
Great. Another great show, Rich. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, before we go,
Yep.
What are we talking about next time?
Okay, Rich. So the next episode, let's call it "Someone Yelled Fire."
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
now they're going to see how dirty we really get.
I wish they could see how dirty we really
Oh
get.
my God, that was a mess, that one there.
Yeah.
But stay tuned. Anyway, thanks for listening once again. I'm Senior Investigator Rich Morin.
And I'm Senior Investigator Ed Myron, and you have been listening to Underwater CSI International Revealed.
On behalf of everyone at Underwater CSI International, Revealed, this is Randy Overton. Thank you for tuning in. Underwater CSI International Revealed is for entertainment purposes only. The information revealed is not intended, nor is it a substitution for the proper training and education received from a qualified dive professional. Certain episodes are loosely based on and may be modified from actual cases. Some episodes are fictional based, featuring procedures that could possibly be used by underwater investigators. Resemblance to destinations, actual cases, or persons living or deceased is purely coincidental.